This episode of Around the Oval is brought to you by Todd Pennington with Revolution Mortgage. Hey, Ohio State fans, Alex Gleitman here, back with another edition of Around the Oval, brought to you by Todd Pennington with Revolution Mortgage. Ohio State camp is opening up this week. Lots of storylines to follow. We will have full coverage for you on BuckeyeScoop.com. Obviously, we feel like we provide pretty objective coverage of the Buckeyes. Scarlet and Gray will provide you all the inside scoop that you need to know about the quarterback battle, what's happening with the battles on the offensive line position, some things going on in the defensive line, and then the back seven is really wide open for the taking with some of the guys that have departed from last year. But we wanted to bring in a for certain objective view of Ohio State, someone that's not necessarily wearing any sort of tinted scarlet and gray glasses. We bring in Brett Ciancia, the founder of Pick Six Previews, one of the most accurate, if not the most accurate publications out there. Brett, thanks for joining the show. I remember we had you on last year when it was madness at this time, figuring out if we were going to have a season or not. And you did a great job on the show, but we're happy to have you back again this year.
Yeah, thanks, Alex, for having me back on, and thanks to the whole Buckeye Scoop staff. You guys are doing excellent work. It's been a year since we last talked, and yeah, I think it's a lot better this time around. Last time we weren't even sure if we're having a season. There was the Big Ten cancellations, the non-conference cancellations. So here we are, 2021. I'm excited for it. I think everyone's really anticipating one of the best seasons of our lifetimes, given the stadiums opening back up and tailgates opening back up, and the non-conference slate, a full 12-game slate. So I'm excited. And yeah, you mentioned it there. It's my 10th annual season preview, and excited to break it down.
Oh, wow, 10 years, can't believe it. Yeah, you really do a great job, very thorough, and I think it was a great resource for me last year entering the season, and as we kind of go through, reference your stuff. So I know a lot about Pick Six Previews, but tell everyone listening just a little bit about your publication, where they could get it. And I know you have a special offer for those listening today.
Yeah, thanks so much. So I launched Pick Six Previews back in 2012 as a college football preview website. And I cover all 66 Power 5 teams, the Power 5 conferences. And over those first 9 seasons since I launched, I've been graded the most accurate Power 5 predictor in America. And that's not just me saying it. It's Stasson.com that grades all these publications that you see on newsstands and online and in newspapers. They've been grading them for 30 years. So since I launched, I have the most accurate title. After my 2019 book, I was selected to become a Heisman Trophy voter. And last year, after my 2020 book, I was invited to join the All-American Selection Committee that determines who gets the All-American honors. So great honors all around. And, it's been a great movement on Twitter. I love all the followers. I've been able to, interact with a ton of Ohio State fans. It's a very passionate bunch, very knowledgeable, and you have a heck of a program to be representing. So yeah, it's been a great 10 years. This one, the 10th annual, was probably the toughest one to produce, just given the lack of games last year, the lack of data points, but then also the crazy transfer portal, roster movement. So it's been hectic. What I do, though, it's a pretty solid balance between the numbers side of it. I have my analytics, but really, film study, calls with coaches, calls with coordinators, putting it back into readable terms, because it gets boring reading a bunch of acronyms and, numbers and codes, and nobody knows what it means. So, I have my numbers there, but I put it back into readable stories for all 66 programs.
That's awesome, man. We appreciate the work, and it makes our life easier for sure. As we preview each game and look toward the season and things like that. And you find out even some things about the teams you cover that you maybe not necessarily are aware of beforehand. So really appreciate that. Let's talk a little Ohio State football to start. Then we'll go into kind of just broader Big Ten and the national picture. Before we go into some of the specifics and nuances of Ohio State this year, what are your thoughts on this team, this 2021 team that Ryan Day has entering fall camp?
Well, yeah, absolutely. There's a lot to be excited. I think that what you're seeing is that when many questioned Ryan Day when he took over for Urban Meyer, many questioned whether he'd continue the high level of recruiting and the dominance within the Big Ten. I think so far he's passed with flying colors. And recruiting wise, he's not only matched Urban Meyer, but probably elevated it. with all the news coming out this week with the recruiting class, getting the extra 2022 quarterback coming in, into the 2021 class. It's just insane amounts of recruits. I mean, it's all these 5-stars. You guys know the names. It's number one receiver in 2020 and 2021. We'll talk each position group specifically, but the recruiting profile is incredible. Their player development is unmatched. They're reloading year in and year out. And, Ryan Day hasn't lost a regular season game. So a lot to like. Now, specifically to 2021, I see this thing rolling ahead and him winning another conference crown and earning another playoff bid. If you rewind 2 years, many picked Michigan actually in 2019. Many had them winning the East and potentially going to the playoff. I stuck with Ohio State in 2019. I trusted Ryan Day. We saw a 3-game sample size back in 18, if you remember, during that suspension. I liked his offensive play calling and the way that he was able to adapt to his quarterback. So fast forward now, we're 2 years in full time, and he has a quarterback battle to deal with. But I think it's a battle that any other staff in America would fight for. You're talking about 3 5-star guys now with Ewers coming in. And then a 4th guy there, a high 4-star. So there's a lot of firepower at quarterback. I know that's the headliner. The other position groups are all loaded, and we'll break that down.
Yeah, I was going to say, Brett, let's start with the offense. Is there, I guess, concern, and how do you see this playing out? They lost Justin Fields, first-round pick, top 15 overall pick. Some could argue he should have been a top 10, maybe even a top 5 pick. They obviously lost Trey Sermon, who came on really strong at the end of last year, and Master Teague's back, but there's not a lot of confidence that he can be a All-American or first team All Big Ten type back. And they have some younger guys in the room and some guys who have been around, but maybe have had some injuries. And then they lost, no questions at receiver. I don't think. They did lose a couple of really good blocking tight ends. They play a lot of 12 personnel, and that could be interesting outside of Jeremy Ruckert, who takes a tight end spot. But I think the interior of the offensive line, losing Wyatt Davis, Josh Myers, and then Harry Miller, kind of in his first year as a starter, not exactly lighting the world on fire, although he did play with a shoulder injury that required surgery in the offseason throughout most of the year. How confident are you in this group? How do you see it playing out? Where are your biggest concerns on the offensive side of the ball for Ohio State?
Yeah, for sure. So let's start with what we know. Right away, we know this is probably the best receiver group in the entire nation. I mean, right away, the starting duo of Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson, they're both All-American favorites for this year coming back. So that's the best 1-2 punch in America right now. And that's not even to mention multiple 5-star receivers behind them, young guys like Fleming and Egbuka, former number 1 overall receivers in their classes. And you have Marvin Harrison Jr. You go on and on. There's so much firepower. I spoke to receivers coach Brian Hartline last preseason, and it was just going down the list of these prospects was just incredible. He's probably the best one in the game at that receiver coach position. So love the receiver group. And then along the offensive line, it could be the best tackle duo when you're talking Thayer Munford and Nicholas Petit-Frere. So I like the bookends there. I'm sure that they'll develop in the interior. I know there's some, replacing 2 NFL picks there, but Paris Johnson got some of the highest accolades possible for a lineman recruit. So, so there we go. We love the receivers, love the tackle duo, confident they'll reload in the middle. At running back, yeah, I wrote this in the book. I think that we've already seen Master Teague's ceiling. Now, it's a heck of a ceiling. But I think to really unlock that next tier, like that Trey Sermon level, that playoff caliber, I think it's going to be Travion Henderson. With Teague, once he gets rolling, he's got great straight line speed. He's strong in short yardage, but he really lacks that shiftiness, that elusiveness in the open field to really make game breaking plays. So I look for Henderson to break through as the eventual lead back. It'll probably start as a committee, but look for Henderson. And then lastly, quarterback, like I hit on, it's a great problem to have. I mean, I think CJ Stroud's your day 1 starter. Of course, he won the MVP at the 2019 Elite 11, worked his way all the way up the roster to the backup role last year to Fields. We saw a little bit of him. It was a long touchdown run, the 1 carry he had, but he got all the first team reps in the spring. So I think Stroud wins it. It's going to be a heck of a battle there. Jack Miller's legit, and Kyle McCord out of Philadelphia, based out of where I'm based. He was Pennsylvania's high school player of the year, incredible arm talent. So you can't go wrong. I don't think that the 22 guy, Quinn Ewers coming in early, that'll be tough. I mean, you're talking about a high school junior rising senior. I mean, it'll be an interesting story to follow. He's one of the highest recruits ever. So we'll keep an eye on that. But I think Stroud's a couple years ahead of him right now.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting with quarterback. None of them have thrown a pass in college, despite CJ Stroud and Jack Miller playing a little bit last year. They didn't play quite enough. The shortened season, I think they kept Justin Fields in longer in games than they normally would have. And, they didn't get the reps, these younger guys that they normally would have in a full season. So none of those guys have thrown a pass. I love Kyle McCord. Quinn Ewers, I think, is just going to be way too far behind with the playbook and the system. But McCord has a shot, and I do think right now Stroud is probably my pick to be the guy. But I think McCord is a guy who could push him, and it's really interesting to me. And we'll get into the schedule in just a second here. But Minnesota on the road, week 1, Oregon at home, week 2. There's not much room for error there. And if someone slips up or isn't playing that great, I could see I don't want to say a short leash, but the talent, as you said, is just that good in that room where it could be a next man up situation if someone isn't getting the job done, even if they escape with wins through the first 2 weeks. So that's going to be interesting. Now, let's talk about the defense, because I think that to me is the biggest factor as far as how far Ohio State goes this year. Last year, the defense was horrible. Let's not sugarcoat it. It was terrible. You saw that on display in the national title game, although there were some key players missing due to testing positive for COVID and things like that, which didn't help the situation. And the whole team had to quarantine, and basically they only had 1 day in pads before preparing for Alabama, which is absolutely wild and makes a lot of sense why that game, I think, ended up as lopsided as it did. That said, Brett, what makes you confident that the defense is going to be able to turn around, not only to win the Big Ten, but also to clinch another college football playoff berth this year?
Yeah, well, again, there's a lot to like. I think real quick before we move to defense, one last note, the inexperience doesn't bother me as much here at Ohio State than it does other places, given what Ryan Day's done here. Remember, Dwayne Haskins only threw like 20 passes before 2018, and he came in and, became a Heisman candidate. And then in 2019 for Justin Fields, he was really only used in a Wildcat package down at Georgia. So came in very inexperienced. I trust Day. I trust the staff. So with defense, yeah. So this was a historically great defense, one of the best of 2019, of the best of the decade in 2019, when you had a Heisman finalist in Chase Young and 2 first-round cornerbacks, but really 7 starters from that 19 unit went pro. So 2020 was going to be a transition anyway. And then you had a coordinator transition, losing Jeff Hafley to Boston College. And then you got hit with the spring, cancellations and fall camp delays and all that. So all that valuable practice time for a young roster was lost. So really it was a perfect storm for a defensive meltdown. And you saw a huge step back in production and stats, and it wasn't the level of quality you'd expect from Ohio State. So with that said, I think it can only go up from here. I think that all those ahead of schedule reps by young guys are now starting to pay dividends. I really like the front 7, really specifically the defensive line. I think there's a lot of firepower up front. At the linebacker level, yes, you lose 4 multi-year starters with Pete Warner, Tuff Borland, Baron Browning, Justin Hilliard. All these guys are gone, and normally that'd be enough to sink a whole defense. But if you look at the roster complexion, there's a couple guys that are very experienced as backups. Dallas Gant and Mitchell there at outside backer. So it's a more experienced new starters, if you can call them that. The thing I'm most concerned about is the secondary. And I know there's a lot of recruiting firepower back there. I think the entire back 7 are actually top 200 recruits. And to those who don't follow the recruiting, those are very high 4-stars, almost 5-star caliber. So there's a lot of raw potential back there. It's just seeing some of the pass breakdowns last year, a little bit concerned. So I think it's, you start with a strong front 7, an experienced, if you can call it that, new starters at linebacker, and then raw potential in the secondary.
Good take. And I certainly agree. I think this is the year you have to judge Kerry Combs as the defensive coordinator. I think last year you kind of have to throw out the window, and there's a lot of factors at play. So we'll see how it works this year. They had an opportunity to bring in a defensive coach with Greg Madison retiring. They chose to promote Parker Fleming to be the special teams coach, move Matt Barnes to full-time DB coach, and allow Kerry Combs to just oversee the entire defense in the hopes that that gives him a better handle. He doesn't have to handle a position and be the defensive coordinator. And so we'll see if that strategy pays off, as well as, just being able to have a full off season of developing these guys and working with them within the system. So it will be interesting to watch that play out. I know you said you have Ohio State winning the Big Ten and also winning or making the college football playoff. I guess my question for you is, do you see them going 13-0 to get to the college football playoff? Do you see them with a loss along the way? And if they have a loss, who do you have them losing to?
Yeah, so I do have Ohio State winning the Big Ten East, winning the Big Ten again, and making the playoff again. There's, like I said, throughout, there's a lot to like. I think that extra year for Curry Combs there will help not only with roster personnel, but with scheme. And I know that he wants to keep most of it the same as Jeff Hafley, but without that offseason last year, it was hard to get any scheme tweaks in there. We'll see if he stays single high or if he goes more to that 2 safety look. I even heard they were looking at 4-2-5 a bit as a base defense. So, but long story short, I think that it's still a younger team, and I think that they might get clipped with the loss early in the schedule. Minnesota and Oregon is a really tough 1-2 punch right out of the gate when normally you're playing MAC teams. It kind of reminds me of the 2014 team, if you can think back to that, where it was a younger roster. They had a younger quarterback there with a young JT Barrett taking over. They lost early in Blacksburg, but then rallied and got stronger and stronger as the season went on. As all that youth, started to pay dividends, they rounded into form in December. So I think you're going to see a similar route. I'd probably predict 11-1. And I don't know where that loss is going to come from, to be honest. It's kind of just a roulette chip. But I think 11-1 sounds about right. That's going to be strong enough to be rolling into the Big Ten title game in Indianapolis. And I think they'll roll Wisconsin or Iowa like they usually do in that title game. And that'll be a strong enough resume by far to be a playoff team again. So, specifically, Oregon is probably the biggest threat there in the first half of the season. When you just think of a team that recruits near, at least in Ohio State's ballpark, Oregon's a top 10 recruiter now. On average. So they're going to bring firepower, and they've won a couple of conference titles. They've been in New Year's 6 games. So they're ready for the big stage, Oregon, more so than in Minnesota. I think Ohio State will take care of them in the opener. So I think maybe Oregon is one to be scared of. I'm not really too worried about Indiana. I think they were a special team last year, a special story, but their record was a bit misleading if you have to really dig into it numerically. So I think Oregon and Penn State are your biggest threats. And then, it's worth saying that the Big Ten West usually throws a wild card at Ohio State. I mean, I don't want to bring up bad memories, but Purdue's had Ohio State's number the last 2 decades, just random years where Purdue will strike up. And, I see them there in November. I hate to think, but no, I think that Ohio State gets it done, goes 11-1, and makes the playoff again.
Yeah. It's interesting you brought up 2014, because I think this is a very similar situation in 2014. That game that lost to Virginia Tech was actually in Columbus, which makes it eerily similar to me about how this season sets up with Oregon coming into Columbus. And it's a very well-coached team. Mario Cristobal is a good coach. He has that team playing physical football. This isn't your Mark Helfrich, Chip Kelly, soft up front, a lot of skill guy talent, no defense really type of team. This is Kayvon Thibodeau is going to be a top 5 pick in the NFL draft. Justin Flo is a star in the making at linebacker. I mean, they are a hard-nosed football team on both offensive line and defensive line. And they have a veteran quarterback in Anthony Brown. They have some good younger guys too. And as you said, they've recruited well. So I see this as a situation where if Ohio State, the quarterback's turning the ball over and the defense still isn't where they need to be in week 2, it could very well, an out-of-conference loss, and then you run the table and take care of business in the championship game, and you get there at 12-1. I will say, the thing I do like is the Minnesota game is on Thursday, September 2nd. The Oregon game is on Saturday, September 11th. So they have a nice long period of time to rest and prepare for that game, a few days longer than they normally would. And I think Oregon traveling from the West Coast and having to play a noon start, I don't think that that's as a bettor. I think that that's something that I look at quite often. And usually it goes in favor of the team that didn't have to travel and doesn't have to change time zones and play that early start. So those are things I do see as favorable, but I agree with you. Could be a very similar type of situation to 2014 where maybe they slip up a little bit early to a team they probably are more talented than and shouldn't lose to, but bounce back and really come into their own as the season goes on. So we'll see how that goes. Ohio State fans certainly hope that it's easy breezy, 13-0, and smooth sail into the college football playoff. But I think that it could get interesting. Let's talk about the Big Ten. Move on from Ohio State. Start with the East. What's your prediction for how the standings go in the East, 1 through 7, and who might be able to actually challenge Ohio State for that spot in the East?
Yeah, so I have Ohio State number 1, and then here's where I might differ from the rest of the nation. I have Penn State number 2, and I think the majority have Indiana up there at number 2, coming off of their special season. And again, not to take anything away, I got to speak with Tom Allen last preseason, their head coach. He's such a passionate guy, very emotional. You saw that shine through last year. I was happy to see it happen for them. But looking forward, I don't know if they have the staying power to stay up there in the top 10. Meanwhile, with Penn State, that was a very misleading record. If you look back, they were 4-5. They outgained Indiana by 300 yards. That's like a 99% win probability. And they blew it there at the pylon at the end. They also outgained Nebraska by 200 yards. So right away, I mean, and I don't like to do revisionist history, but where I'm stationed here, I'm trying to look forward to 2021, and I'm kind of viewing those as wins in a forward-looking way. Penn State was much better than the record. They have the recruiting profile better than the rest of the division, right there in the top 15, top 10 area. And what I really like about Penn State schematically is that they're bringing in Mike Yurcich, who is Oklahoma State's longtime coordinator, bringing in that Big 12 vertical passing attack that you haven't really seen in the Big 10 too often. So they have and it fits right into their receiver stable as their strong, their strongest position group on the team. So it really hinges on Sean Clifford if he can take a step forward or not. So I like Penn State 2. I like Indiana 3. Michigan at number 4. Michigan and Michigan State are very much wild cards in my eyes. Michigan more so with the way that they move their staff around. Harbaugh, he got an extra year here. I don't know how many. He's like a cat with 9 lives. I don't know how many years he can stay there, but this time around, he's done a double coordinator switch and moved a lot of guys into positions they haven't coached before, like a line coach coaching quarterbacks and vice versa. It was very bizarre. So, but that they do have underlying talent there, and they could rise up and shock some people. At number 5, I have Michigan State. Again, another mysterious team. They're the transfer portal team of 2021. I mean, given the late start to the Mel Tucker era in 2020, if you remember back, that was like an April hiring right near the pandemic breakout. So there was no time for the usual transfers that happen when you change coaching staffs. So all that accrued and then happened double time here in 2021. I think it was like 35 players transferred out. He added a solid 25 in, and these are very high recruits or former top 100 guys. So it's very mysterious, Michigan State, but I have them down at 5th. And then quickly at the bottom, Rutgers, I was very impressed with Greg Schiano, his first year. You saw them, maybe their record didn't reflect it, but they continued to fight until the final whistle. They fought, and as he says, they chopped their wood. That's his expression. Even in the Ohio State game, if you think for Buckeye fans, I mean, you had a nice solid lead, and Rutgers didn't quit, man. They were doing onside kicks and grinding it out. I think they got to within a few scores, but I know they lost big, but just the mentality, I think, is solid going forward there. Maryland, I have in last. They've recruited well. They have a proven quarterback with Tagovailoa. I think 2022 for them. I look at them next year moving up the ladder, not so much this fall.
Yeah, it's you brought up Penn State. Ohio State fans are very familiar with Mike Yurcich. He was actually on Ohio State staff as quarterbacks coach and offense coordinator in 2019, Ryan Day's first year. And I think they're just, I don't know how to put it. This is Ryan Day's system, and he wants his quarterbacks coached a certain way, and he wants the system run a certain way. And I think it was just oil and water with Yurcich from what I understand. And so I think he's a really brilliant mind and a good offense coordinator. It just didn't work out at Ohio State. It's Ryan Day's show. And it's great for Mike that he got another opportunity after going down to Texas last year to come to Penn State. And that should be a little added motivation for him to kind of take it to the Buckeyes this year. But I do agree. I think Penn State was interesting with the way their schedule and season played out. They had that heartbreaking loss to Indiana in the first week, and they as much as they deserve to lose that game because of how they played at the end, and some of the calls James Franklin made, and he's proven to make some questionable decisions in game at times. They really should have won that game. I thought that was the wrong call, and then so that was like heartbreaking. And then they come back the next week, and I think Ohio State just broke them. And if they won week 1 but still lost to Ohio State, I don't know if last season would have went as poorly as it did until the end, where they really picked it up and started playing good football. So I agree. I think they are going to be in that second spot. And I also agree. Michigan's a really interesting team. I see them as like an 8-win team this year. I don't know what was your record for them that you have?
Yeah, they're right in that 7 or 8 win range. I have them 4th in the East. But really, like I said, they're one of the more variable. They could finish as high as 2nd, or they could just absolutely tank again. So I fully admit they're very variable. And to Penn State, you make a great point, because when you think of coming into a season at a program like that, think of their team goals. They probably have, win the Big Ten East, win the Big Ten, make a New Year's Six bowl, maybe, beat your rival Ohio State. So within 2 quick weeks, bam, bam, they're already out of all their team goals. They're 0-2, so they're eliminated from any playoff contention. Any Big Ten race now they've lost to Ohio State is out, and they had guys opting out. You had that long, everyone went through it, but that long pandemic off season, I just think it was a terrible situation mentally for them. Not that that's an excuse. You got to be strong enough to bounce back, but looking back, you can kind of see where it went wrong. They're going to get back to their normal standards as a top 20, top 15 team. And, they always play Ohio State tough. They really do. Back to that 2016 blocked field goal in Happy Valley that really sparked their, Penn State's kind of comeback as a program. They play them tough. So keep your eye on that one. Luckily for Ohio State, they get them at home. I think it's that October 30th game in Columbus. And for Ohio State's sake, in the cross division, they avoid the top 2 from the West. And they're physical teams too, Wisconsin and Iowa, where sometimes a team like that will grind you down for an additional week after you play them. So dodging Wisconsin and Iowa is huge, and getting Penn State at home, and Oregon at home for that matter, both huge for scheduling.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And then before we move on to the national picture, let's go to the West. I tend to agree with you. Wisconsin and Iowa, somewhere 1 and 2. I actually kind of am going to go with Iowa. I think surprising people and maybe winning that division this year. I like every now and then Kirk Ferentz pulls it off, and he'll probably win Big Ten Coach of the Year and steal it from someone else who deserves it. But who do you have winning the West, Wisconsin or Iowa? And then because I feel like there's always a team that surprises, like Purdue that one year, Northwestern, I guess last year a little bit. Is there a team that you have your eye on that could be a sleeper in the West?
Yeah, so I like Wisconsin out of the West, but I think you're right on there that it's a 2-team race. It's a legitimate 2-team race between Wisconsin and Iowa. In fact, when I was breaking both teams down and looking at position groups and their performance the last few years, they're very identical teams for 2021. Think of the old Big Ten West formula, the big offensive lines, the power run game. They still have all that going. Their defense, both are loaded, both experience-wise and star power-wise, great coordinators, peaks in recruiting. So for teams that traditionally recruited outside the top 40, they're starting to sign top 20, top 25 classes. So look for both of them to be legitimate teams in the West. I like Wisconsin this year. They, again, talking about 2020, they were better than their record showed. They had a lot of quarantines and injuries that hit key position groups. It just brings me back to my point. It was really tough to do the 2021 season preview, looking at all these different circumstances each program went through, even position groups went through. Like, I know Wisconsin's offensive line was really banged up and they were thin that last year. They only had 2 playmakers at receiver, and both were either knocked out or quarantined. So anyways, I like Wisconsin. They're a proven track record there, and Iowa number 2. Then you go, a pretty sizable gap all the way down to Nebraska and Minnesota. I have tied in 3rd. I think they finished with identical records within the conference. And then in 5th, I have Northwestern. I think that most have Northwestern there in 3rd. So this is a bit of a going against the grain of all the other publications. With Northwestern, look, I have a ton of respect for Coach Fitzgerald, what they've built there. It's all those buzzwords that you probably get tired of hearing, like, family and culture and fit, but really they live it out. They're the perfect example of this. If you look up and down their stat sheets on Sunday mornings after they played Saturday, you think there's no way in heck this team won the game, but they really execute on the money plays like third downs and red zone. And they just grind out victories, no penalties, no turnovers. So anyways, but long story short, they go through cycles. When they're veteran, when they have, experienced guys at the skill positions, they can win the division, but then they go through major reloads and can go 3-9. So I think they're on the downside of their cycle, place them 5th. Then I got Purdue 6th and Illinois 7th. Both interesting too. I mean, with Purdue, they're still extremely young. This is one of the biggest youth movements we've ever seen, like a complete roster overhaul. I think last year there was only like 10 seniors, and like 10 more juniors. It was like 65 in their first or second years. So anyways, that's a year older. It might click. I mean, that could be a team that could just surprise some people and put up a ton of yards through the air. They have no run game at all. The defense has issues. So they're towards the bottom right now, but can scare teams with scoring. Illinois is probably the complete opposite. They're going to be a slow tempo team. Bring in Brett Ciancia, the old Wisconsin coach. He's bringing that old Big Ten West formula back home to Illinois. It was one of the nation's worst defenses last year. It's going to take more than one offseason to fix on defense, but their personnel on offense fits that old Bielema formula. It's a solid offensive line, a pretty decent running back stable. So they might just try and grind down teams and win, 10-7, something ridiculous, low scoring, low tempo, but still in last. So that would be the rundown 1 through 7. I think it's really just a 2-team race at the top, and bringing it back to Ohio State. Like I said, you're lucky to dodge both of them because that's a huge scheduling boost.
Yeah, absolutely. Ohio State definitely favorable schedule from the Big Ten West standpoint. And as you said, Oregon, Penn State at home, Michigan's on the road, but that hasn't affected Ohio State too much. And there will be plenty of scarlet and gray in that stadium, not to mention that I don't think Michigan's too strong of a team this year. So certainly not as daunting as years past. The game at Indiana certainly is interesting, but I think Ohio State's coming off a bye before that. So that should be beneficial for sure. Let's wrap it up here, break down the national kind of landscape. So you have Ohio State in the playoff. Who's your playoff teams 1 through 4?
Yeah, so Ohio State's in there, and then a couple, Oklahoma and Georgia. So these are two programs that they've had one side of the ball figured out for a while. And the difference where I bring them from just their conference contenders to playoff contenders is that they now have their other sides of the ball ready to roll. So first with Oklahoma, obviously the offense. You think of Lincoln Riley's offense, their Heisman winners, Heisman candidates. That's all back. You have Spencer Rattler can be the next great quarterback there, an experienced offensive line, and incredible skill talent, running back and receiver. So the offense is there, but finally they have a defense. Alex Grinch, a name that you guys are familiar with. He did great work back at Washington State with his so-called speed defense, what he calls it, speed D. What they want to do is trade some size for speed, fly all around the field, create turnovers, and it really started to click last year for what it's worth. In an offensive-heavy league in the Big 12, they finished as a top 20 defense, and 10 starters are back from that defense, and there's a lot to like. So Oklahoma's in there, a complete team. Georgia, now basically reverse what I just said. They've always had the defense under Kirby Smart and coordinator Dan Lanning, first round picks on defense, 5-star guys on defense. Finally, now they have an offense to pair with it. Kirby Smart took a page out of the LSU playbook with Joe Brady and the Alabama playbook with Lane Kiffin by modernizing the offense, finally taking it out of the 1980s, out of the old traditional SEC power run attack. And, they're trying to throw it vertical now. It's a modern offense. Todd Monken has Big 12 roots too. So I really like it. And, if you only tuned into Georgia in September and October last year, you saw, the old Georgia with Stetson Bennett, and they couldn't do anything offensively. But after they put JT Daniels in there, the 5-star arm out of USC, they really lit it up. They looked very impressive in the vertical pass game, and a lot of that talent's back. So Oklahoma, Georgia, Ohio State. And then here's really the shock pick of 2021. I've got UNC, the Tar Heels, coming out of the ACC, beating Clemson, and securing a spot in the playoff, a newcomer to the playoff finally. And right away, I got a ton of feedback, as you can imagine, for that pick. But The last we saw of Clemson, they were getting routed by Ohio State by, an up-tempo offense and, that had great athletes on the outsides, a vertical pass game, and a downhill powerful run game in the middle. And what's that sound like to me is UNC's offense. The way that Phil Longo, I got to speak with him. He's an offensive genius. He's paired his air raid pass principles on the outsides with that downhill run game. And what brings them from 8-win range to playoff caliber is their defense. Finally, they're starting to stockpile top 10 classes at UNC under Mac Brown, and all these 5-stars and high 4-stars are now entering their second and third years on campus. So, and lastly with UNC is their schedule. This is what really drew me to them. It's a very, very favorable schedule. They're actually favored in all 12 regular season games this fall, which not many people are looking at. I think they go 11-1 and set up a win and in against Clemson there in Charlotte, and they have the firepower to do it. So UNC is my number 4.
It certainly takes some stones to pick anyone but Clemson in the ACC. So, you're not doing this just to make a bold prediction that's not going to have consequences. I know you pride yourself on having the most accurate Power 5 publication out there. And so there's data, there's science, there's obviously opinion and plenty of research behind that pick. So it'll be interesting to see that one play out. I think Ohio State fans and many others will be happy to not see Dabo Swinney in the playoffs. I think Ohio State obviously overcame that, got the monkey off their back with Clemson last year, and they probably should have won. I know I feel like they should have won the game the year before, and I know Ryan Day feels that way.
I feel that way as well. My gosh,
I think everyone does, right? Even Dabo Swinney probably knows they got pretty lucky in that one.
Alex, what I should have done was I put Clemson 6 this year. I probably should have dropped to number 11. That's a special number to Dabo. That would have been more fitting, but no, I think that second in the ACC is a good enough pick there.
Yeah, Ohio State fans would love to see them at 11, but that's a solid 4. I mean, outside of Clemson and then Alabama, obviously, what teams outside of those 4, and this is the last thing we'll touch on before we let you go, is what teams outside of those 4, we're not going to say Alabama or Clemson because those are obvious, do you feel are kind of sleeper teams to crack the college football playoff this year?
Yeah, sure. I'll throw 3 in real quick. Iowa State, obviously, and this has gotten a lot of publicity this year, just the way they bring back 20 starters. I'm calling them America's team this year, given that they're going against all the current trends of transfer portal, of all the big money of coaching contracts, the 5-star recruiting and all that. So they're a throwback. It's Matt Campbell, who's turned down a lot of lucrative offers to really stay and build something at Iowa State. It's a bunch of 5th and 6th year guys, these veterans and walk-ons, and it's just a cool throwback story. And they play smash mouth football too. It's just a tough year timing wise. They get hit with Oklahoma's best team in 2 decades. So Iowa State's close. Texas A&M out of the SEC is really close as well. They're really a quarterback away. What carried them last year was their defense, and 9 starters are back there. They have incredible skill talent with Jalen Weidermeyer at tight end, an All-American candidate, Anaya Smith, Isaiah Spiller, Devin Akane. Really a lot to like, really just a quarterback away. And if they hit a home run with this Haynes King, this 5-star kid out of Texas, he's a dual threat and the whole bit. If he's as advertised, that could really be a team that could beat Alabama and be playing Georgia in the SEC title game and potentially crash the playoff. And then a team way outside the realm of possibility for most, again, from the Big 12 is TCU. This is a team that has their best unit since that 2014 team, loaded at receiver, loaded at defensive line, and Gary Patterson always draws up a solid defense. Again, it's just timing where they get hit with not only Iowa State's best team in school history in 100 years, it's also that great Oklahoma team I mentioned earlier. So it's going to be tough to win the Big 12. I could go on and make a case for a lot of these teams. There's a lot to like in the national anthem. Clemson, I think I give 66 of these. So I love doing it, and it's been great catching up.
Yeah, thanks again, Brett. Really appreciate it. For everyone listening, make sure you go to pick6previews.com and definitely I will be a customer for sure as we now get into the camp season. I highly recommend it. It was a great product last year. That was my first time actually really diving into it. He's a great follow on Twitter as well. So definitely make sure you check out Brett. Brett, I saw you got now, you got a bunch of conference accounts now. So he has spelt out Pick Six Previews is the national account. It looks like it's at Pick Six _ spelled out Big Ten, to follow the Big Ten account. I think those are definitely both great follows. I know I'm following them. So
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks again, Brett, for joining the show. Appreciate you breaking everything down from Ohio State to the Big Ten to the national picture. And I know that Ohio State fans are certainly happy that you've got the Buckeyes in the college football playoff once again.
Yeah, for sure. And thanks again. It's there at pick6previews.com, at pick6previews on Twitter. And for those interested in the 2021 book, I have sample pages up there to see examples, but then also a discount code for Buckeyes fans. It's simple. Just type in Buckeyes there at checkout. So I appreciate having me, Alex, and the whole Buckeye Scoop staff. Keep it up, and we'll talk again soon. Good luck this year.
This episode of Around the Oval was brought to you by Todd Pennington with Renovation Mortgage. If you've been thinking about refinancing or buying a house, check out our sponsor, Todd Pennington with Revolution Mortgage. They offer low rates for refinancing and home purchase loans, including first-time home buyer programs, down payment assistance, and cash-out home equity loans. Check out revolutionmortgage.com/tpennington.